Well, hi, everybody. It's nice to be back now that it's warmer out. And the sun is out now, and it's springtime. And I don't know if you guys have noticed, but all the trees are flowering. There's a lot of green. It seemed to have happen overnight. I don't know. I was driving around Nyack yesterday, and I couldn't believe how green it was. So it's perfect for Earth Day, even though it's the last. Every day should be Earth Day, in my opinion. But officially the last day of it's Arbor Day, Earth Day this month. Green leaves, growth is so important. And if you know me, I love birch trees and I paint them whenever possible. And this is probably my third lesson in about, I don't know, 6 years that involves birch trees.
I remember the one with the cardinals.
Yes, exactly. Yep. I'm not ashamed of it. I love teaching how to do birch trees. I love, painting, collaging them, any form. I did I did an art day in my school this Saturday and I threw in birch trees. So I'm shameless about it. So this one is really simple. And for these online Zoom classes, I love doing oil pastel combined with watercolor because oil and water don't mix except for when you make art with them. And the fact that they don't mix helps you make some really cool art. So that's what we're going to do today. You can make as many birch trees as you like. I like to do things in threes. That's a little quirk of mine. And if you want to have your setup like the trees on the left as I've had them or on the right, totally up to you. The process is the same regardless of how many trees you put, where you put them, and it starts with the trees. So hopefully you can see pretty well the example up here. Some birch trees are straight. I think for this one, maybe I'll do a couple of more straight ones. Birch trees do tend to lean forward, or some of them are spin or jack straight. We're starting with a green oil pastel. So our supplies are my favorite inexpensive Pentel oil pastel kit. You can do this with, they have 12, 16, 32, 24. Doesn't really matter. I have brown, green. You can use grays. The one important color or non-color is white. White is going to be the center here of the trees. We're going to start drawing it with oil pastel and then filling in with white. For the candles one, I showed how you can do this with crayons and candles, which is, you can actually use the wax from candles to help you create resist, because once you put the wax on the paper, the watercolor will not soak into the paper. We're not going to do that for this. I kind of like the idea of using candles. We're just going to use oil pastel. But first I'm going to draw it out. I very, very rarely, if ever, do any underdrawing with pencil when I'm using oil pastel, because oil pastel does not cover pencil easily, but it covers itself easily. But just be brave here. People don't like to draw with oil pastel, but errors can be covered with oil pastel because oil pastel forgives itself. So just draw some parallel lines. Like in this case, I'm going to do 6 parallel lines, which are 3 sets of them. Envision where your trees are going to go and draw your parallel lines. So I'm really drawing lightly, sketching them out. Once I'm happy with my shapes, I can commit to drawing a little bit or pressing it a little bit more firmly. I normally wouldn't, but I do want you to see. Okay. Please let me know if I need to move anything, if everybody can see properly. Now that I drew lightly, but now for the white of the birch trees, I'm going to press hard. Birch trees have white bark, and then underneath the bark it's black. And when the bark dries and peels, it reveals those black telltale, what we recognize as birch trees, like almost like it's like a pattern of that black underbark. I'm just going to outline with a little bit of brown because I like the mixture. And then I'm going to take my white and pretty decisively, this is a different kind of oil pastel, but it's still white, firmly, decisively, just press. You're not going to be able to see this on screen, but you'll have to take my word for it. You can hear it too. I'm pressing pretty firmly. I'm really putting that oil pastel right into that paper, coating it really well. so that when I cover everything with watercolor, it's not gonna soak into the part where I put this white oil pastel. I'm kind of also doing horizontal lines because birch trees, the bark does seem to split horizontally. Pulling some of the brown and green that I put on the edges into this center of my, the trunk of my tree, which is going to help when I add black, because it kind of, you don't want it to be like a ladder where everything's spaced out evenly. You want it to be kind of arbitrary, natural. You're not making a pattern or an evenly spaced ladder. You're making what happens in nature. There's no kind of evenly spaced cracking of the bark. It's pretty random. So once I get a good coverage vertically, I'm gonna go ahead and pull some of those colors horizontally. And final. And if you work with oil pastel, if anyone's familiar with oil pastel, that paper wrapper is good to protect your hands, or not protect them because oil pastel is completely harmless to your skin, but keep your hands clean anyway. You have to peel. So if you don't care about getting oil pastel in your fingers, peel the whole thing. If you want to keep your hands fairly neatly, a little bit of a paper sleeve. Okay. And then horizontally. So the colors, if you notice that I drew in, are the colors that are in my background, green, brown. You can input red, for instance, or orange. In the fall, if this were a fall scene, and I've done fall birch as well. I've done winter birch. So every season, I feel like they're really beautiful. They stand out in every season in a different way. Okay, so now I'm gonna grab my brown and my green again. And then you could use black. I actually use black here. I don't often use black in any kind of landscape composition. For this, I'm gonna use black. It makes it easier for you to see on screen. And it does kind of mimic what birch actually looks like. So where I kind of randomly pulled some horizontal lines, and some of them kind of marked them stronger than others. Now I'm gonna, like, in a squiggly kind of nervous way. I'm not doing anything straight. I'm gonna just, from either side, just pull in some black lines. Picture the birch peeling and what it will look like. Sometimes there's a big gash open. Sometimes it's very thin. Sometimes right in the middle, often off to the edge there. Some birch trees don't have a lot of peeling at all. Some have a lot of peeling. So do you see how it's kind of not a ladder? Fairly arbitrary, random. And that's what makes it look really natural. Some will have it at the top there, some at the bottom. Some just a little bit of it. Some really, it's been gashed out. Okay. And then some you see, only see a bit on the side. And then because I never use a color straight from the tube or from the oil pastel stick, I'm using some brown right on top of the black, just to kind of mute that black a little bit. It's a little harsh, I feel. So I like to, sometimes I use purple. If this were a winter scene, I would use blue. It's kind of like what's reflected in the summer. There's a lot of green and brown. So I just add a little bit. It's almost like painting. If this were oil paint, I'd be dabbing on a little brown with a brush. Maybe put in its own little brown here and there, because some of the scraping, the peeling is very new. Okay. All right, and then evaluate it. You happy with it? Make any adjustments that you want to make? So here, so a lot of times I have very strong light that comes in one direction or the other. This is not particularly strong, but it is leaning that as if the light's coming from the right. So the left side has a bit of shadow. That helps things look 3D. Right now, these can look kind of flat. Once I start adding a shadow side, then they start whatever it is, whether it's birch trees, apples, a glass, a mug, when you start adding shadow on one side or a side that's slightly darker, and I'm using a blue here, and all I'm doing, I just was saying today, we were doing portraits I teach at Maria Regina high school students. It's adding ingredients. So really this light blue is an ingredient that I'm adding. And then the whisking device is going to be my white. White oil pastel is a great mixer. This is also defining my edge a bit. And on the other side, I'm gonna use my white to blend that out so it doesn't have the shadow. And this is a subtle shadow. You can make this a deeper, if you had this as a deeper blue or brown, it would look like, sunlight was really hitting those trees. I just want to make them look three-dimensional, which is why I'm adding the blue on that side. Now I'm going to take my white, and because these are basically cylinders, I'm going to go in a horizontal kind of stroke to blend that blue in. Also blend my outline tree and make my edges kind of defined here. See, they're getting crisper, and then pull in horizontally. That also reinforces the feeling of bark, birch bark. Birch bark, when you look at it closely, it's not vertical, it's again cylindrical tube-like. It's, you have these horizontal the texture is horizontal, not vertical. So I'm cleaning and taking my white now and doing the same thing on the other side, but there's no blue there, so it looks like the light's hitting it. And this is also, this blending with white is also ensuring a really nice good coating of that oil pastel, so that when I do put the watercolor, it's not gonna go, it's gonna leave my birch bark alone. Not gonna mix with it. Okay, that's two. And one last one. That blue, mixed it in, give it a horizontal texture, clean up the edge. We're gonna do one final defining of the edge after we do the watercolor. And I like how when you pull some of the black and it gets on the tip of the white oil pastel, it gives even more of that feeling of birch because you're pulling in these horizontal kind of curved, cylindrical kind of curved lines, and it really enforces that feeling of natural birch trees. Okay. So now we're going to start switching mediums. We're going to come back to oil pastel too. I'm going to switch to, oh, one more thing I want to do. So in the grass area, I have, there you can see, hopefully, let me put it closer. Long white strokes that look like grass. And again, because it's a cool little technique that's done with oil pastel too. So I'm peeling my oil pastel. So I have a nice flat edge. I'm the flat edge here is what gives me a sharp kind of grassy texture. So I'm just kind of, and you can see it on the surface. I might put some in yellow so you could see, because you cannot see, I could see the lines there. I'm gonna cover some of my tree and my bark, not a lot. I want the birch trees to look like they're in front. But just to show, so you could see the stroke, I'll get a pale yellow. You know, I'll use a light green. You could probably see that better. I didn't use that in here, but I'll use it here. I'm basically letting you start at the bottom, pressing and then lifting up to mimic tall grasses. This is not someone's manicured lawn here. This is in the woods. Maybe Lenore Preserve, which is right near me, where they don't manicure their lawns, unlike Untermeyer, which is much more, the cultivated gardens. So that's what I've done with the white. I'm going to put some more white though back because I've done a lot of green for the purposes of this demo. But I like the white. Okay. And if you wanted to, you could do some, well, let's do one here. You can do like a branch that say it's coming from another birch tree that is very tall, and it's because birch trees do have branches that come out this way. But I'll do one in white so you can see what happens when I add watercolor. All right, so that's the first stage of oil pastel. We're only going to go back a little bit to touch up some of the edges and add branches. So now watercolor paints. You can use the Prang, inexpensive. They have 12 count. I like this size because I have more of a color mixture. My brush, you don't need a wide brush. You can use, these are two different sizes. Either one of them will work. The bigger one helps you cover more area faster. That's just why I'm using it for this, the demo. If you're sitting and you have lots of time, you have a cup of tea or coffee next to you, just sitting there, use a smaller brush. Water, and then you use rags. So reuse whatever, this is an old dish towel cut them apart and I use them for rags. We're talking about, Arbor Day and saving earth resources. I'm big into rags instead of like paper towels. And then cleaning up a little, this is the mixing surface here. I'm going to clean that up with my rag, make myself have a nice clean surface, and then you can moisten your little paint cakes so that you can pull them as you need them and they'll be wet. And then start with I did like a runny kind of light bluish teal, whatever color you want background. Just started with that, but the main thing here is your paint has to be pretty thin, a lot of water, okay? Less paint and more water. You always add it, it's much harder to take it away. So just paint and look what's happening. It's leaving the trees alone. It's not bugging my trees. And that branch I put over there, it's leaving that alone. And because I have a big brush, I'm covering it quickly. And then I'm going to go back and to make sure my stroke is pretty horizontal because it's, the earth is, the horizon is flat. The earth is not flat, the horizon is flat. And, so my strokes are going to be, go wide instead of tall. You really don't want to see any strokes. You just want a nice light background. And down here at the bottom, because, there's tall grasses and such, I'm adding more green. I'm putting less blue, more green. And again, I put my long grasses there with oil pastel, so I don't have to be neat. I can just paint. There's no painting around the grasses that I put in. I'm moving from the blue to the green because there's a lot of green there. I'm actually going to add some yellow. I want more green, so now I'm adding yellow to make it kind of a brighter, younger green. Newer growth kind of thing. Here you can kind of do some, mimic the grass. Put some darker grass in the foreground. The darker and brighter colors that you use in the foreground, the better, because that pulls your eye forward. And then in the background, you want to do lighter, softer, the bluer colors. Blues recede, and colors that are strong, the light colors and blue colors recede. And then I even put some brown. It's just in nature, there's always brown. So even in the winter, because sticks and trees. So I put some browns, oranges. It just makes it look more natural. I also put brown in the birch, the crack, the peeled birch area, so it kind of creates unity. When you have those colors throughout, no one says, "Oh, why is the grass brown?" It's not, doesn't appear brown, but it is a nice unity to the color, the landscape, the color palette, because I'm picking up colors from one place and using them somewhere else too. And then just here, which happy accents or intended accents, it looks like a little maybe growth of brush or some kind of, who knows, bushiness. And I'm using a wet brush and I'm just tapping. You will not have the dripping issue if you're not using an easel. It's dripping here because I'm using an easel. And this is something I always talk about when I'm doing these demos. Sometimes I like what they do, but a lot of times I'm trying to race to stop the dripping. I think in this case, again, I did this one flat. In this case, I'll probably get some interesting shapes down there from the dripping. And when it sits too flat, and I encourage you to do it flat, you get pooling of, the pigments pool, and there are some areas that are darker than others, and it looks really, really lovely when that happens. It's a nice thing that watercolor does. Okay, so the bottoms are done, and now, I mean, really, there's not all that much left with this. We're gonna do the um the birch leaves, and for that we want a less wet brush and more pigment. So I'm really picking up a lot of paint here, making sure my brush is loaded with this paint. And then I put the branches on top, so I'm sort of planning out my where my leaves are gonna go. And then I'm gonna put my branches on top of that. Excuse me. Picking up some yellow. And I'm kind of twisting and twirling so you can go right on top of your birch and it's not gonna cover it. So these branches look like, the leaves look like they're sort of almost behind. This dripping, I'm erasing it. Using some darker green here. Putting some leaves up here. Ah, look at that drip. I have this to try to counter that a little bit and pick up some of the extras, just a paper towel, which you won't need to do if you're doing this horizontally. Okay. And then there's browns in there, olives. Mix it up, makes it look more natural. And turn this drip over here into branches. Yeah, branch. I'm gonna put some little tiny leaves just by tapping it with my paintbrush, trying to make it dry so it doesn't drip around this white branch that I made. Orange and green make brown, so I'm putting that in there. Or turning my brush around a little so I get some. I don't want it to be a pattern. I just want it to look like real leaves. A little different kind of look here with the dripping. It's kind of neat. I'm not hating it. It's different. When it sits, it pools, and like some areas get really big. And then some areas you have some nice tiny little specks. Try to get some fresher, greener growth up here. So I'm getting pulling some yellow on here with my green. Now, if you wanted to force leaves on in the front, because you know, in nature, that's what happens. You want a really dry brush, and you're gonna kind of force it. See, it's dry, so it'll let me put it on top. So maybe I'll have a branch from this one that is in front of that birch tree. So the drier the brush, the thicker the paint really is what it is, and it'll let me kind of add some on top there. Now I need this to dry a bit before I can put oil pastel on top. So I'm gonna add some texture to this background. Pulling up again, we're getting water now. Now we want just texture, so I'm gonna have a dripping. I'm gonna use my paper towel, get some of that off. That's ostensibly that's the sky, so I want to get some thinned out blue. Add that texture. So the drips here, they kind of like were all caught by some of the V's. And they ended up, to me, it looks like they're like um, those, you can either pull them in, but I like the way some of them look. They look like tops of some of those flowers that grow in like woods. I'm putting this little bushy thing there with a dry brush of green. I want to get my skinnier brush since I have it here. Pull in some, this really thin brush. Brushes are inexpensive. So you can get like a set of mixed with brushes. I'm gonna use some brown because again, I feel like I need to tone down that green and pull up some of these taller. And it's just moving it's letting the brush lift, and that's how you get those smaller or the thinner blades of grass. So start off pressing it and then lift up the brush to get the thin blades of grass. Okay, and then texture here, and then that should give me time, that should have given that enough time to dry. But hardly any pigment in here, it's just kind of like a moist brush texture. And pressing just kind of firmly. Because of the dripping, it's pulled a lot of color down here. Another trick, a clean brush that you dry acts as an eraser. So I want, because I like that definition of this, clearer area behind it. I'm pulling that back in here. What you can do, even if you're doing this horizontally and don't have the dripping, pulling paint right off of the paper surface with a clean brush and a napkin. And I'm just using drawing paper. If you have watercolor paper, you could still do this, but the oil pastel, you'd have to really push hard to get that into that the textured surface of watercolor paper. I don't like the way that it feels personally, dragging the oil pastel on that textured surface, but if you don't mind it, then say go for it. You just have to, be strong and stronger touch and push harder. Just putting some more of this tall grasses here. Now we're gonna grab our oil pastels again. I have three colors. I have the brown, green, and black. I'm gonna start with brown and see where it's driest. This brand, I'm first gonna clean up my edges, define them, just, lightly define your edges. And the bark is so often scraggly at the edges. So you don't have to go super straight here. Mhm. And the green here, do the same thing. Also blending that brown in a little bit. And then brown, I'm gonna do some branches. I'm gonna do one here and not straight. You kind of want it to be curved. Some of them start in, the middle. They don't all start at the edges. So I'm starting this from the center of the birch trunk. And it's gonna be for this one here. And I'm gonna define this one a little bit more. I did with white. Maybe there's a branch there that doesn't have any leaves. Let's put one here with this bunch up here. This one, the branches behind, we'll say, and then we'll put one here in front. Okay. Green, just to, mush the brown into the paper. And then black just gives everything, very lightly just define everything. And then the few times I use black when I'm doing birch. Same thing when you're doing branches, you kind of just have to lift up the oil pastel, or if you're doing a brush at the end, so you get a thinner tip. You don't want a straight blunt edge. You want a nice thin lift, so that your branches have that nice thin lift. And then because it's birch, there are areas of, even those little branches are gonna have white. So kind of like grind it in here and there. So it looks like there's some white bark there too. It's not a lot, it's not as obvious as it's there. Oh, I forgot to add this little pieces in front, so I'm gonna draw a branch in front to explain those leaves over there. To the light. Here and there, not like on every part of these. I already put white when I started over here. I have a thicker branch, so I can kind of do horizontal there. Here, it's hard to do horizontal, just to follow the shape, push that breath pastel in. Okay. If I over colored in that edge, the white is the great equalizer here. I could pull some of that edge in, so it doesn't stand out as strongly. I mean, we're doing kind of impressionistic. Impressionism is just the painting of light. So it doesn't, the great impressionist artists work quickly, captured light quickly. Monet, Manet, Van Gogh, that's what their landscapes were pretty big blotches of paint quickly added to the canvas because they were capturing light quickly in plein air, meaning outside in the open fresh air. So that's kind of what we're trying to mimic here, without this scene in front of us. And I'm just about done. I want to add some of my leaf shapes that drip down. Now that they're dry, I can try to. This branch is empty, but I have more here, so I can kind of try to add that back because a lot of it dripped down. It's like racing gravity here. We're trying to catch them before they drip all the way down. When there's a layer of watercolor paint underneath, they don't drip down as quickly. So I can kind of trick the paint on my brush to stay up for a little longer and not drip. Because something is there grabbing it, you know, there's little particles of paint on the surface. Where before it's just paper. Well, that's a little bit more like it. Okay, and once I sign something, or at least I try when I sign something, I call it done. So I'm almost at the point where I could sign this. Just want to put some loose leaves that are broken from their branch or further down here. And then I'm going to ask if there are any questions while I'm signing this. You can kind of type it in the comments or shout them out. And always get a skinnier brush to sign. I'm going to grab some brown paint. You can sign with oil pastel too, but the brush is thinner, so it's easier. Anybody do one as I work that is willing to share? No pressure. This one might be, I think this is a simple one, and I've actually done this with my freshmen. And they have been able to follow along. I'm actually going to do that oil pastel because I put too much oil pastel there. It's not letting me write because I put the green. So I'm going to do this with oil pastel. And it's last day of April. I'm just going to put 424. All right, there we go. Our trio of birches, our spring birches to celebrate Arbor Day.